Just last night, Vlad and I sat down together and we watched the Sergeant Pepper's Beatles documentary. And I had such fun watching that one. I learned so much. I really enjoyed all the details that it told about how the album was created and went through every single song. And it, I enjoyed the whole experience. So tonight, I'm flipping the album to the B side, and I'll be listening to the first one on the album, Within You, Without You, which I have to say, on that documentary, there were some fascinating details that really caught my attention, and so my ears are wide open tonight for that and more. You can find that movie watch on my other channel, Amy's Cut. You'll find the link right here. Go there and watch it if you wish and enjoy. Now, as you know, I've already done my first listen of this song, Within You, Without You. And so we'll watch that together now, and then I'll read. So, the official genre classification, Indian classical and raga rock. Really, Indian classical? Based on what I know and after what I've been reading and also after what I watched on the movie last night, that's a stretch. Well, Mark, these classifications are pulled straight from the official Beatles website. So neither Vlad nor I are trying to pigeonhole or mislabel anything. We're just trying to give me and everybody the most comprehensive, within reason, information about the song. Before then, everything I had known had been in the West, and so the trips to India had really opened me up. I was into the whole thing, the music, the culture, the smells. I'd been let out of the confines of the group, and it was difficult for me to come back into the sessions. In a way, it felt like going backwards. Everybody else thought that Sgt. Pepper was a revolutionary record, but for me, it was not as enjoyable. I was growing out of that kind of thing. A month later, to everyone's relief, George popped into the sessions with another composition that fit in perfectly with where his enthusiasm was right then. And it fit in perfectly with the kaleidoscope of musical genres on display on the album, depicting a euphoric atmosphere amazingly well suited to the summer of love mentality of that year. The song was titled Within You, Without You. Regarding playing the sitar, as well as understanding Eastern music, Ravi Shankar explains to Andy Babiuk in the book Beatles Gear. It takes 10 or 15 years to reach a very good standard, because it's not just the playing of it. You have to learn the whole music system. So what George Harrison did, along with many other people, was to take up the sitar and just start to play it. They produced a sort of sound which to us sounded really ridiculous. It's like if someone in Africa takes the violin and plays it and says, "How do you like this scratching sound?" It takes a long time to produce the real sound and play the real music. When George showed his interest in sitar and said he would like to learn a little more, I told him very clearly that sitar is not like guitar, where you can just learn it on your own. You have to undergo many years of study, like the violin and cello or any of the Western classical instruments. Isn't it interesting? And this is a great moment for me to also mention that some of you in the community have been asking me, in fact, I got a message just today saying, why do you distinguish, why do you separate rock music and Western classical music? Why do you make a distinction between the two? Because really, they're all the same. And in a way, there is truth to that. But at the same time, I think that this paragraph brings out an important element and helps clarify why I do that. Because Indian classical music also is rooted in a centuries-long tradition. So is what we call classical music in the West, or Western art music. And the idea is that rock music didn't exactly grow out of that tradition. It has come to meld with that tradition. And it has come to the point where it's so crossed over and the lines are so blurred that, yes, we're talking about a single stream of music at this point. But we can't say, I don't believe that it's accurate to say that rock music originated in the Western classical music tradition. And that is why I distinguish between the two, because I think if we take the view that they're all the same, then we're looking in hindsight. We're looking from our vantage point now rather than from the stream of history moving forwards to our point. So this is an interesting statement, and it's kind of the same way with rock music and Western classical music. Now, as you know, I've also been doing a bit of my own research on the side, preparing for these second listens, and I discovered that the lyrics for this song were supposedly inspired by and kind of roughly drawn from conversations which George Harrison had at Klaus Formann's house in one evening that year. And that is why each verse begins with something like, what was it? We were talking about, and it's kind of referencing the discussions that they were having that evening. So it's another example of a piece of music, going back to the movie that I just watched, the documentary I just watched, a piece of music drawn from really ordinary, gritty, everyday, the everyday life going on. And that was something that the movie brought out, was that so many of these pieces of music on this album are really rooted in everyday life, unlike what we might expect for an album which was so popular during the Summer of Love, when it was all fantastical fantasy, dreaming about love and how the world could be perfect. So just some interesting thoughts going into this. Now let's listen and have some fun. You just gotta love that introduction, don't you? I mean, it is, in a way, you could say, where on earth did this come from? But on the other hand, if we're listening to this album as it hit me the first time around, the idea that its colors and its vivid experiences and pulling from all different inspirations, it fits right in. And this opening, this introduction just captures a mood, a scent, in a way that, to my Western ears, paints a picture. So much of it has to do with not just the notes being played, but the instrument, the sound of the instrument itself, the sitar, and the way the notes are bent. I mean, you could even do this on a violin and kind of come up with an imitation of it, but it really relies on that sort of flexible pitch. I'm just looking at the notes on the page and thinking, okay, what if I try them on the harp? In fact, what if I do that? And then we'll back up, and maybe I'll even try to play with the recording for a minute. But there's our first note, the drone note, which should continue, right? But it'll die away here. It doesn't have the same effect at all, does it? It's like, okay, are you playing some tune? Okay. But now listen to how it sounds with all that bending flexibility. Oh. Hold on a second. I also have to get things set, because I remember reading that it was pitched, it was played in C, but then they sped it up so it sounds in C sharp. And if I'm going to play with them, I have to be in the same key. That's a bit closer. So much of the imagery that comes in this song is absolutely reliant on the instrumental choice. And it's a bit different than, say, well, let's say she's leaving home, which of course it has the harp, and it really needs to have the harp to sound like what we imagine. And it has the strings, it needs it for that elegance, but you could use a different type of ensemble. You could use a different plucked instrument and still get an approximation that really, it kind of evokes the same feelings. But for this, you have to have specific kinds of instruments to get this imagery. And I think that that's one of the things that makes it so effective for us Westerners, is because just simply the sound of that, even if it's not played in the precise, formally educated classical Indian style, I think that just the fact that it's a sound that we associate with a certain world is one of the things that catches our imagination and starts painting these colorful images in our mind. And so we, unlike the raga masters, we can enjoy it as a colorful, evocative piece of music that really calls up a certain world, a certain place, a certain experience. Shall we say ignorance is bliss? Wing, 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 wing. What is that, a cello coming in there or something? Or is that still an Indian instrument? I don't know exactly, because the sonic manipulating of this recording, it kind of makes everything sound a bit different, doesn't it? But one of the things that I noticed, okay, first of all, this melody is really elegant, isn't it? There's a sort of elegance about it, and a long melodic line. I mean, so much of popular music, even Beatles music, is made up of short melodic phrases, something that you could sing in one breath. But really, if I'm looking at this melody and I'm trying to figure out, okay, where does the phrase begin and where does it end? Oh, it's a long ways down the road. Let's see. We're going from we were talking. Okay, so maybe da da da. That might be a phrase ending there, because then we feel it pick up again. So we were talking about the space between us all. That could be called the first phrase, and then it kind of repeats, doesn't it? But this one, you cannot say that it stops there, because it continues. Of illusion. And it's extended in that way. And then we have this, which really belongs to that as well. Let's listen to it. Let's listen to it as he sings it too, because it strings out like a, I often use the picture of a thread or a ribbon. This is like a little bit of a rough piece of yarn, with a bit of fuzz on it, the way the texture is, isn't it? We experience that entire stretch after the first phrase. We experience that entire stretch as one continuous phrase, even though there are some little sub-phrases along there. And it's a bit unusual in that regard, but it's one of the things that really pulls you into this mindset, strings you along, and says, you have to enter this type of mind in this piece, and the instrumental, the sonic feel, the rhythm that is kind of imitating the Indian rhythms, and the voice, the way that he's singing it, also in this very meditative, peaceful, tone of voice, all of that says, I'm pulling you into this. I'm going to make you listen, and we are going to have this experience, and you are going to see another perspective here. You know, it's kind of like that, isn't it? It kind of does that to you. Listen to what's happening in the strings there. I do think that must be a cello. I'm going to call it a cello. If it's not, forgive me, enlighten me. This is all about enlightenment, right? But listen to what that cello-like instrument is doing with these little miniature sub-phrases, kind of a commentary, a little bit of filler. It's like a little bit of conversational interjection, except it's not really. In a way, this is kind of like the murmur of a room full of people, a social setting, and you have somebody talking to you directly to your face. We were talking and telling you what we were talking about, and then you hear in the room around you, you hear the murmur of voices and conversation happening. It's not really invading this intimate conversation you have, but at the same time, it is supporting and contributing to in a way, the feeling of intimacy, simply because all of that fades into the background a bit. But in spite of that, listen to what that cello-like instrument is doing to kind of support and build a sort of climax in this verse here. There is this little ascending line, ya da 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 da, which it adds in a couple times just at the right moment. We were told you. Ooh, it's as if you feel this pain and this anxious desire. If they only knew, and the instruments have really built us up to that point. It's a real peak in the song, I think, and I love the way that even though the harmonic writing is so sparse, and most of what we're hearing is unison and a drone, a little bit of pitter-patter rhythms, and then those little conversational interjections from the cello. That's it. It's very thinly written. At the same time, it does such a wonderful job of just swirling us up to that. With our love, to try our best to hold it there. With our love, with our love. It's also the poetry, isn't it? It's the repetition of with our love, with our love. And then you hear the instruments carrying on. And then the cello comes in and kind of repeats the same idea. With our love, with our love. We could save the world, but it's as if you hear with our love, with our love, with our love being emphasized and built up into this snowball effect. Listen once more. It's as if it's tumbling down a bit, kind of tumbling down out of the sky from this moment of intensity. Oh, we come down a little bit lower where we can regroup ourselves. And then, of course, notice how this melody, which as I said, is so beautifully fluid and travels in places without really breaking for a true new phrase. Let's hear this whole verse again, because it just builds. That's one of the other things that helps take it to this point. I mean, everything is just so well balanced and connected there. So going from this point here, let's mark this and look how long this phrase really is. When we find it, let's say this phrase really begins right here. When we find it, to try our best to hold it there with our love. And at this point, we have to jump. So this is not part of it because of the way the score works. So we jump to here. This is where it reappears and continues from there. With our love, we could save the world if they only knew. and going on because that's held out. If they only knew. And da 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 da. That is where we finally rest. And you know, it's interesting because I'm looking at this. I am coming from a Western music perspective. And the other thing that I was thinking of is, you know, this is, as he said, you know, he had been steeped in the West, the culture, the ideas, the worldview, and he steps out and goes to India and experiences this whole different way of thinking and way of life. And he comes back and he starts feeling like, oh, you know, this just, you know, I've kind of outgrown just being confined to this one perspective. But at the same time, that is his anchor. That is his homeland, his native world. And so as I listen to this, I'm not judging it from an Indian classical music perspective because I can't, but I'm judging it from a Western music perspective. And from that perspective, it works really well. And I think the reason why is because underneath all of this, it is still firmly rooted in the Western classical and art music tradition. And I did include classical there because, as my viewers know, and as I really enjoyed connecting the dots some more, you know, in many ways, this is the album that was the linking point between rock music and Western classical music. It is the point at which we could start to say that the two are no longer separate one from the other. And so, and this piece really doesn't sound like it's really rock. So I'm putting it more in the Western classical tradition simply because it fits so well from there. And we could go on about all the reasons why, but I'm just going to leave it there. But the fact is, from my Western experience, it's a great piece of music. And I love the fact that it evokes in my imagination another world so well, even though it is so strongly rooted in the Western traditions. Okay, continuing. That bit of melody is kind of circular. Try to realize within yourself, no one else can make you change. It seems as if it's just swirling round and round. Somebody's taking a pen and goes loop a loop a loop a loop a loop down the page, and that's what you hear musically. In the string ensemble in the back, and it fits well with the idea that life flows on within you and without you. From the first half with the verses, where we had this long melodic lines, and then here, notice what's happening. Da 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 da, da 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 da, da da bum, da da da, little bursts. And it's using the same general outline shape of the piece, right? You could say that it's kind of quoting the melody, but at the same time, it's remaking it. We've gotten a bit livelier too, but it becomes a bit of a relief and almost like a dance, a moment where we've done this reflection, this meditation, we've kind of cleansed ourselves, and now we're going to celebrate. We're going to dance. We're going to celebrate this fact that we are really very small. We don't have the ability to save the world. We're not these big Superman type heroes. We're very small, and the realization that we are small and that life flows on within you and without you. It's not just within you, it's not just without you. It's a whole connection and flow. And then out of that idea, there's a reason to celebrate. Celebrate the way in which this frees us to actually make a difference in our smallness. It's a fun idea to explore, and he does a great job of expressing it. And the music gives us this moment to celebrate the happiness and the relief and the joyfulness of this realization. And to see your I just realized something. Okay. Go and listen to the opening of Smetana's Moldau. Well, for this to make any sense of why on earth I'm bringing this up, I have to make sure you understand that Smetana's Moldau is a tone poem which is telling the story of the river, the journey of the river. And it starts with two small streams, and you hear in the opening lines the two small streams coming down the mountains, and then at some point they meet and they start to flow together and it becomes a river. And then you hear you hear a village dance along the way as the river progresses, and you hear all these different things happening along the river's banks. Okay, why did I bring that up? Because just here, as I'm listening to this, just now, I realized this is more than just a dance. It is a dance, but it is the dance of the life that is flowing on within you and without you in a sort of, and the operative word is flow, like a river. And it starts very small. All right, I'm going to stop there for a moment too, because I want to point out also, going back to the simplicity of the arrangement, so much of what we just listened to was simply unison and octaves. Most of the writing in this piece, there's very little harmonization going on. Very little. It's primarily unison and octaves. Listen to all these instruments singing the same line. Of the end of the second verse where it says, with our love we could save the world. If they only knew, we hear this bit of a climax kind of going up to the same pitch range. Ding, ding. Just noticed something else too. Okay. Going back to this whole idea of Western versus Indian. This line, who gain the world and lose their soul. That is such a quote from Western religious tradition, isn't it? Well, I don't know if it's a quote from, if it could be also considered a quote from some Indian material as well. But it jumps out at me because it is practically word for word. What shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Straight from the Bible. And another example in the lyrics. So we have the music, we have the lyrics, everything. This idea that as much as this is somebody who is embracing the Eastern and exploring the Eastern traditions and mindset as much and as far as he's able to, he is still rooted in the Western world. He's rooted in the Western music. He's rooted in the Western culture. He's rooted in the Western religious traditions to the point that even as he's moving into this other way, these other ways of, spirituality and worldview and musical styles, everything, still his homeland lives within him. We were talking about the love that's gone so cold and the people who gain the world and lose their soul. Well, those of you, perhaps some of you might be versed in Indian sacred literature. I would love to know if there is a quote perhaps exactly like that, or that word for word as I hear it from the Western perspective, because it's true. Many of these ideas exist in many religions around the world. But for me, I hear that as another example of he's a Western boy. It is the same passage that we listened to in verse 2, which built up into this whole climax. But this time, it's left a little less dramatic, isn't it? Because he doesn't actually sing up to that point. He doesn't say, with our love, we could save the world if they only knew. No, he just says, they don't know, they can't see. Are you one of them? And then it's the cellos that complete the line up to that point. But because it's not the voice itself, it's not the lyrics, it's not the main melody, we don't experience it with the same climax. It's more of a question. Are you one of them? And that invitation to us to examine ourselves is then we're pulled into it by the cellos. They can't see. And then the laughter at the end. I mean, we've just gone through this whole spiritual examination. Well, not really. I think it fits actually, because we were talking. This was conversations at a social event, a social gathering, small, in someone's home. And we were talking there among us about these things. And maybe that laughter at the end, maybe it's simply another reflection, another reminiscence of that evening of conversation, that we were talking and it was warm and it was meaningful. We felt connected. We were able to connect on this level where we could talk about these kind of spiritual matters and the challenges that face the world. But at the same time, it wasn't dark. It wasn't somber. It wasn't some sort of, heavy discussion. It was a social gathering. And when we finished, we enjoyed, we said our farewells, we said bye. It was nice to see you. It was such a great evening together. I don't know. That's the best explanation I can think of why on earth is there laughter at the end there. You've seen beyond yourself. I mean, it almost feels like the music didn't finish. It almost feels like we were just winding up for another something. But instead, evening's over. Time to say bye. It's an interesting way to end the piece. Well, really, as I've explored this piece today and paid attention to a lot of these details, having watched the movies that I did, having done the reading that I did, I'm playing with this idea of this idea that George Harrison is a Western boy, and at the same time he's embracing and exploring and trying to incorporate as much of Eastern thought and perspective as possible, sound world, everything. As he said, what was it? The smells, even the smells were something that he brought back, and the world he didn't fit in his old world anymore in the same way as he had. As I'm looking at these lyrics, though, as I'm listening, and as I've emphasized, I really feel that this is grounded in Western art tradition. And I guess that makes a good point, because it's not about becoming Eastern, becoming Indian. It's not about giving up who you are, where you've grown. It's not about any of that. I think the message of this is found, summary in the last lines. When you've seen beyond yourself, when you allow yourself to be small, you're not the center of attention. When you realize that you are just one of many, and that the many is all around the world. It is not just you in your Western bubble or you in your Eastern bubble, but that we are all connected. And we can all learn from each other. We can all appreciate each other with our various backgrounds. We can all embrace each other and the various backgrounds, and yet we can remain ourselves. We don't have to give up our identities. When you've seen beyond yourself, then you may find peace of mind is waiting there, and the time will come when you see we're all one, and life flows on within you and without you. And I think it's rather beautiful, actually, that somebody like George Harrison, with his very Western life, was able to step out of it and see that there are other ways, there are other perspectives, and they have merit too. And we can learn from them too. And if we're willing to learn from each other and not think that we each have all the answers to life, if we're willing to appreciate each other and share with one another, the fact that this is so anchored in Western tradition is really a beautiful thing, because it is a testament to the kind of exchange and interchange that can happen when we lay aside our prejudices and we lay aside our egos and we share and embrace and explore with care and respect for each other. And I guess for that is really the message that seems to come out of the song for me. And it also fits in the whole kaleidoscope of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and all the wonderful colors and flavors and textures and styles that we've heard. This is another one of many. And they are embracing and exploring and sharing all of these equally, both Eastern and Western. And we enjoy them all. And they fit together so well on the album. They flow one from the other so nicely on the album. I mean, what did we just come from on the other side of the album, on the A side? It was Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. I heard one of the early recordings, not the final recording, and someone said, for the benefit of Mr. Kite, and I heard Lennon's voice saying, being for the benefit of Mr. Kite. He was adamant that it must be the entire title. Anyway, just a funny little bit humorous that I noticed, but that one took us back to another world in a different way, didn't it? And, well, we've had Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, another world in a different way. And of course, Sgt. Pepper, the intro itself, another world in a different way. And now we have Within You, Without You, another world in a different way. And what a beautiful, colorful, rich experience it is to be able to step into each of these worlds sonically and musically and experience them and appreciate them and enjoy them. That is one of the things that makes it possible for this album to hold together, is that they give equal standing to everybody and everything in that regard. And, well, what a great song. I enjoyed it. And I have enjoyed this whole exploratory experience, and I'll be seeing you soon for the next one.